You wake up one morning and something feels off, not in a catastrophic way. No disasters, no heartbreak, no tragedy, just a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, a sense of exhaustion that goes beyond feel comfortable. But over time, it becomes something else, something insidious, a quiet, unnoticed form of self-abandonment. The psychology of self-suppression. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." For those who are too nice, the unconscious belief driving their behavior is this: if I make others happy, I will be safe. If I accommodate, I will be loved. If I give enough, I will be worthy. But where does this belief come from? Psychologists point to early conditioning. Many people who struggle with excessive niceness were raised in environments where love was conditional, where approval depended on compliance, where conflict was punished, where being difficult or expressing personal desires led to rejection. Somewhere along the way, they internalized a dangerous lesson. To be accepted, you must shrink yourself. So, they became experts in people-pleasing. They learned to read emotional cues, to anticipate needs, to shape-shift into whatever version of themselves would cause the least trouble. And they carried this skill into adulthood, mistaking it for kindness, when in reality, it was a survival mechanism. But survival mechanisms come at a cost. Nietzsche and the death of the authentic self. Friedrich Nietzsche spoke of the dangers of self-denial, warning that suppressing one's true nature leads not to virtue, but to a slow, internal death. He rejected the idea that being good meant being passive or self-sacrificing, arguing instead that a fulfilled life required the full expression of one's will. But modern society has distorted this idea, conditioning us to believe that self-sacrifice is synonymous with moral goodness, that to be liked is to be virtuous, that to be agreeable is to be worthy. And so, the person who is too nice wears their compliance like a shield, believing it will protect them, when in reality, it makes them a target. Because the world does not reward self-erasure, it exploits it. The shadow side of niceness. Carl Jung introduced the concept of the shadow self, the unconscious part of us that contains all the traits we suppress in order to be accepted. Those who are too nice often repress their anger, their assertiveness, their right to take up space. But repression does not erase. It only buries. And what is buried does not stay silent forever. The person who is too nice begins to feel resentment bubbling beneath the surface. They smile, but it's forced. They agree, but inside, they seethe. They say yes, but every cell in their body screams no. This inner conflict grows until it manifests in unexpected ways: anxiety, chronic fatigue, unexplained sadness, even physical illness. The body keeps the score, as trauma expert Bessel van der Kolk writes. And the body knows when you are betraying yourself. The existential crisis of the selfless person. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist philosopher, argued that the greatest tragedy of human existence is living according to the expectations of others rather than forging one's own path. He called this bad faith, the act of lying to oneself in order to fit into society's mold. The person who is too nice lives in a state of bad faith, convincing themselves that they are happy, that their endless giving is meaningful, that they don't need anything in return. But beneath the surface, a question haunts them. Who am I, if not the person who exists for others? And if that identity were to shatter, if they were to stop pleasing, stop complying, stop sacrificing, what would be left? This is the fear that keeps them trapped. The terror of stepping outside the role they've played for so long. The horror of realizing they have no idea who they are without it. And so, they continue. They nod. They agree. They give. They suppress. They tell themselves that this is what it means to be a good person. Until one day, they wake up, look in the mirror, and realize they don't recognize the person staring back. The slow erosion of self. How niceness becomes a curse. There's a kind of suffering that has no name. It doesn't come with visible wounds, dramatic breakdowns, or obvious warning signs. It's quieter, more insidious, a slow unraveling of identity that happens so gradually. You don't even notice it until you're standing at the edge of an abyss, staring into the hollow reflection of yourself. This is the fate of the person who is too nice. At first, the consequences are subtle. You feel tired, but you tell yourself it's normal. You feel unappreciated, but you brush it off. You say yes when you mean no. And the guilt of disappointing someone seems worse than the exhaustion of overextending yourself. But over time, something shifts. You start to realize that the very behaviors that were supposed to bring connection, harmony, and validation are actually doing the opposite. Niceness, when taken too far, doesn't bring you closer to others. It isolates you. The paradox of niceness, why it repels instead of attracts. You would think that being kind, agreeable, and always putting others first would make people value you. But strangely, the opposite happens. Psychologists have long studied a phenomenon known as the doormat effect. When someone is excessively nice, people begin to take them for granted. Their kindness stops feeling like a gift and starts feeling like an expectation. And expectations are rarely appreciated. People start assuming you'll always say yes, that you'll never push back, that you will absorb their burdens without complaint. And slowly, without realizing it, they stop respecting you. You sense the shift. The way people dismiss your thoughts. The way they forget to ask how you are doing. The way your absence is barely noticed because they've come to see you as background noise, a constant, reliable presence that doesn't require acknowledgement. And that's when the loneliness sets in. When your kindness becomes a mask for resentment. You don't want to admit it, but it's there, a bitterness creeping in beneath the surface of your smiles. A quiet anger that whispers, Why does no one care as much as I do? Why do I always have to be the one who adjusts? Why am I surrounded by people, yet feel completely unseen? This is the hidden cost of being too nice. It breeds resentment. But the problem is, you have spent so long suppressing your needs that you don't know how to express this anger. You don't know how to set boundaries without feeling like you're betraying the identity you've built. So, the resentment festers. It turns inward, morphing into self-doubt, self-criticism, even self-loathing. You wonder if you're the problem. If you just need to give more, be better, try harder. You mistake your exhaustion for failure. The psychological toll, anxiety, depression, and emotional burnout. When you prioritize others at the expense of yourself, your nervous system never gets a break. You live in a constant state of emotional hypervigilance, always scanning for potential conflicts, always managing others' emotions, always performing the exhausting role of the nice one. This chronic self-abandonment leads to anxiety. You become terrified of disappointing people, of being perceived as selfish, of causing even the slightest discomfort. Depression, the loss of self slowly drains your sense of purpose, leaving you with a lingering sadness you can't quite explain. Burnout, your mind and body reach their breaking point, and even the smallest requests start feeling overwhelming. Studies show that people who suppress their own needs for the sake of others are at higher risk of developing chronic fatigue syndrome, autoimmune disorders, and even cardiovascular disease. The body keeps the score, and it does not tolerate self-betrayal forever. At some point, it rebels. The dangerous attraction of narcissists and manipulators. There is another, darker consequence to being too nice, one that no one warns you about. The world is not full of people who appreciate kindness. It is full of people who see it as an opportunity. Narcissists, manipulators, and emotionally draining individuals are drawn to those who lack boundaries. They can sense it, this invisible signal that tells them, here is someone who will tolerate me. Here is someone who won't push back. Here is someone I can use. And they do. They push limits, make unreasonable demands, guilt trip, gaslight, and subtly condition you to accept behavior you never would have tolerated before. And you let them, not because you want to, not because you don't see what's happening, but because confrontation feels like an unbearable betrayal of your role as the nice one. So, you keep making excuses. You tell yourself they don't mean it, that they're just going through something, that if you love them enough, if you're patient enough, they will change. But they don't. They never do. Because why would they, when you've shown them they don't have to? When niceness becomes powerlessness. What began as an effort to be kind has now stripped you of your voice, your energy, and your dignity. You find yourself nodding along when you should be saying stop, apologizing when you should be demanding accountability, smiling when you should be walking away. And you finally ask yourself, at what point did I lose control of my own life? This is the great deception of being too nice. It feels like a virtue, but it's a slow form of self-destruction, a programmed pattern of compliance that makes you easy to exploit, easy to forget, and ultimately, easy to replace. But what if it didn't have to be this way? What if breaking free didn't mean becoming cruel, but becoming whole? What if there was another way? One that allowed you to be kind, without being consumed? What if real kindness was something entirely different from what you've been taught? The awakening, when niceness is no longer an option. There comes a moment, an unmistakable, irreversible shift, when you realize you can't do this anymore. Maybe it happens in the middle of a conversation, when someone casually dismisses your feelings for the 100th time, and instead of swallowing it like you always do, something inside you whispers, no more. Or maybe it's after a long day of saying yes to things you didn't want to do, smiling through exhaustion, carrying the weight of others' expectations, and you sit alone in the quiet of your own thoughts and finally admit to yourself, this is not working. This is not who I am. The first feeling is fear. If you stop being the person everyone expects, who will you become? If you stop saying yes, will people leave? If you stop absorbing the emotions of others, will you still be loved? But then, beneath the fear, something else begins to surface, something you haven't felt in a long time. Power. Because for the first time, you realize that you have a choice. You always have. the radical act of self-possession. Friedrich Nietzsche believed that true strength comes not from pleasing others, but from embracing one's own will. That self-actualization is not about fitting into the expectations of society, but about carving out an existence that is uniquely yours. This is where your rebellion begins, not in rage, not in bitterness, but in an act of quiet revolution, reclaiming yourself. And here's the truth: real kindness, authentic, uncorrupted kindness, cannot exist without boundaries. Because kindness without limits is not kindness. It is submission. And submission does not breed love. It breeds resentment, exhaustion, and invisibility. So, if you want to be truly kind, if you want to give in a way that is meaningful and not self-destructive, you must first do something that will feel completely unnatural to you. You must become selfish. Not cruel, not unfeeling, but self-possessed. Unwilling to betray yourself for the sake of approval. Unwilling to sacrifice your own well-being for the illusion of being good. And to do that, you must unlearn everything you've been taught. The 3 great lies of niceness, and how to destroy them. Lie number 1. If I say no, I will lose people. This is the fear that keeps you trapped. The belief that your worth is measured by what you can provide. That if you stop being agreeable, people will disappear. But here's the brutal truth. If someone only values you when you have no boundaries, they do not value you. They value what they can take from you. And those people, you want to lose them. The moment you stop bending. The moment you start setting limits. The people who benefited from your self-sacrifice will react. Some will guilt trip you. Some will accuse you of being selfish. Some will withdraw their affection as a form of control. Let them. Because the people who truly love you, the ones who respect you, who see you, who care about you beyond what you can give, they will stay. They always do. And the ones who leave, they were never yours to begin with. Lie number 2. It's mean to put myself first. From childhood, we are conditioned to believe that prioritizing ourselves is selfish. That goodness is measured by how much we are willing to endure for others. But consider this. If your best friend was exhausted, if they were being taken advantage of, if they were sacrificing their happiness for the comfort of others, would you tell them to keep going? Would you call them selfish for wanting peace? Or would you tell them to stop, to rest, to protect themselves? So why can't you extend that same compassion to yourself? Real kindness is not about suffering for the sake of others. It is about giving from a place of strength, not depletion. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you are under no obligation to set yourself on fire just to keep others warm. Lie number 3. If I stand up for myself, I will become like them. You've seen what selfishness looks like. The narcissists, the manipulators, the ones who take without giving. And a part of you fears that if you start prioritizing yourself, you will become one of them. But setting boundaries does not make you cruel. Saying no does not make you heartless. Protecting your energy does not make you unkind. It makes you whole. And the difference between selfishness and self-respect is this. Selfish people take at the expense of others. Self-respecting people refuse to let others take at the expense of themselves. You are not choosing to be unkind. You are choosing to stop betraying yourself. And that is not cruelty. That is freedom. How to reclaim your power and never be a doormat again. Rebuilding yourself after a lifetime of excessive niceness is not easy. But it is possible. And it begins with 3 fundamental shifts. 1. Speak the unspoken truth. How many times have you swallowed your words? How many times have you smiled when you wanted to scream? How many times have you pretended to be fine when you weren't? No more. The next time someone disrespects you, don't laugh it off. Don't make excuses. Don't bury it. Say it. This makes me uncomfortable. I don't like how you're speaking to me. No, I can't do that. Your voice is your power. Use it. 2. Make discomfort your ally. Saying no will feel unbearable at first. The guilt will claw at you. The anxiety will scream that you are making a mistake. That is just your conditioning trying to pull you back. Let it scream. Let the discomfort sit. Do not run from it. Because every time you hold your ground, every time you refuse to crumble under the weight of guilt, you retrain your nervous system to see boundaries not as a threat, but as liberation. 3. Accept that you will be the villain in someone else's story. The hardest lesson of all. No matter what you do, no matter how gently you set boundaries, there will be people who call you selfish, who make you the villain, who twist your decision to protect yourself into an act of betrayal. Let them. You do not owe anyone an existence of quiet suffering, just so they can remain comfortable. Your life belongs to you. The turning point. Becoming the kind person who can't be controlled. The greatest irony? The moment you stop being a doormat. The moment you reclaim yourself. The moment you start saying no without guilt and yes, only when you mean it. That is when people truly begin to respect you. That is when your kindness means something because it is no longer a currency, but a choice. That is when you stop being disposable. That is when you stop feeling empty. That is when you finally become free. But there is one final truth. One last, unsettling realization that changes everything. Because once you reclaim yourself, once you learn to stand tall in your own power, you will never be the same person again. And the question is, are you ready for that transformation? The ultimate truth, the final, most powerful realization. The death of the old you. Something strange happens when you finally break free. At first, there's a moment of exhilaration. A rush of energy that feels almost like rebellion, like you've cracked the code, figured out the hidden truth about why you've suffered for so long. You start setting boundaries. You stop apologizing for existing. You walk away from relationships that once drained you. But then, an eerie silence follows. Because for the first time in your life, you are no longer defined by others' expectations. And that's when you realize the most terrifying part of this transformation. You are not the same person anymore. The version of you who always smiled, who always said yes, who tolerated, endured, and sacrificed, that person is gone. And now, standing in their place, is someone you don't fully recognize yet. Someone who doesn't seek approval. Someone who is no longer afraid to disappoint people. Someone who chooses themselves, even when it's uncomfortable. And the question that lingers in the air is this. Who are you now? The unforgiving reality of true freedom. There is something they never tell you about reclaiming your power. It is lonely at first, not because you will be alone forever, but because when you stop being the person everyone expects, the world doesn't quite know how to respond. Some people will resist your change. Some will accuse you of being cold, distant, or even selfish. Some will quietly slip away, unable to control you anymore. And for a brief moment, you will wonder if you made a mistake. If maybe it was easier when you were compliant. If maybe kindness without boundaries was better than the unsettling quiet of self-possession. But then, something unexpected happens. So, here you are, at the edge of everything you once believed, staring into a truth that can't be unseen. You've spent a lifetime being agreeable, bending to expectations, giving without limits. And now, you understand the cost. Niceness, when taken to the extreme, is not kindness. It is a slow self-erasure, a quiet surrender of your needs, your desires, your voice. But now, you have a choice. You can go back to who you were, shrinking, pleasing, nodding along to a life that doesn't feel like yours. Or you can reclaim yourself. You can set boundaries without guilt. You can say no without apology. You can walk away from those who only stayed because you were easy to use. And when you do, something incredible happens. The people who belong in your life will stay. The ones who thrived on your weakness will leave. And standing in the silence they left behind, you will find something far more valuable than their approval. You will find yourself. The truth is, you don't have to stop being kind. You just have to stop being kind at your own expense. And if that means disappointing a few people, let them be disappointed. Your life is not theirs to control. It is yours to live. If this video spoke to you, if it made you rethink the way you navigate the world, let me know in the comments. Have you ever struggled with being too nice? Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? I want to hear your thoughts. And if you found this message valuable, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive into the truths no one talks about. Until next time, be kind, but don't disappear.